Walter Brooks had seen all kinds of people in his years working as a janitor at the sprawling Westview Mall. The clamor of busy shoppers, the echoing laughter of children, and the never-ending buzz of activity had become the backdrop of his daily life. But today felt different. Something caught his eye. As he swept the tiled floor near the food court, Walter noticed a little girl standing by the water fountain. She was no older than 6, her face pale, her eyes wide with worry. She clutched a well-worn teddy bear tightly to her chest. People walked past her without a second glance, too busy with their own errands. Walter leaned his broom against the wall and approached her slowly. He had a kind face, with soft eyes and a warm smile, which made him seem less intimidating to children. "Hey there, little one," he said gently, crouching down to her eye level. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up at him, her lip trembling. She nodded but didn't say anything. Walter noticed her small hands trembling as she held on to the bear. She seemed scared, and his heart ached for her. "What's your name?" Walter asked, his voice soft and calming. "Amelia," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "That's a lovely name," he said with a smile. "Amelia, I'm Walter. Don't worry, okay? I'll help you find your parents. We'll figure this out together." She nodded again, her eyes flickering with a glimmer of hope. Walter offered his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Amelia placed her tiny hand in his. "Do you know where you last saw your mom or dad?" he asked as they began walking together, keeping a slow and steady pace to avoid overwhelming her. Amelia shook her head. I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "We were in a store, and I turned around, but they were gone." Walter nodded understandingly. "That's okay. We'll find them. Let's go to the security office first. They'll help us get an announcement out." As they walked through the mall, Walter talked to Amelia to keep her distracted from her fear. "That's a pretty cool teddy bear you've got there. Does he have a name?" Amelia managed a small smile. "His name is Mr. Fluff." Walter chuckled. "Mr. Fluff. He must be pretty brave, huh? Just like you." The compliment made Amelia smile a little more. She seemed to relax slightly as Walter's calm presence made her feel safe. Walter glanced around, hoping to spot someone who looked like they might be searching for a child, but no one seemed to match. They reached the security office, and Walter explained the situation to the officer on duty. The officer took down Amelia's description and promised to make an announcement over the mall's intercom system. It shouldn't take long, the officer assured them. As they waited, Walter stayed close to Amelia, keeping her entertained with small jokes and stories. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about this little girl. She reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. "Don't worry, Amelia," Walter said with a reassuring smile. "We'll find your parents. You're not alone." And deep down, Walter wondered if fate had brought this little girl into his life for a reason. Walter and Amelia sat on a bench near the security desk, waiting for the announcement to go out. The mall was still busy, with people rushing by in all directions. But for Walter and Amelia, time seemed to slow down as they talked. Walter leaned back on the bench, watching Amelia closely. She was quieter now, clutching Mr. Fluff tightly to her chest, but she seemed a little less scared than before. Walter smiled at her. "So tell me, Amelia, what's your favorite thing to do when you're at home?" Amelia looked up at him, her eyes still a little sad but curious. "I like to play with my toys. And I love reading books," she said softly. "My mom reads to me every night." "That sounds nice," Walter replied, his voice kind. "I used to love when my mom read to me too. She always had the best stories." "What's your favorite book?" Amelia's face brightened a little. "It's called The Little Mermaid. My mom says it's her favorite too." Walter smiled. "Well, you're in good company. That's a classic." He thought for a moment, and then added, "What about your dad? Does he read to you too?" Amelia shook her head, her eyes dropping to the floor. "No, he's always busy with work." Walter could see the sadness in her eyes. He decided to change the subject to lift her spirits. "What's the best thing about your mom?" he asked gently. Amelia looked up, a small smile forming on her face. "She always makes the best pancakes, and she gives the best hugs." Walter chuckled softly. "Sounds like you've got a great mom." He paused, thinking for a moment. "I'm sure she's missing you right now." Amelia nodded, but there was a hint of worry in her expression. "But what if she can't find me?" Walter reached over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her, Amelia. Don't you worry about that. You're brave, and brave people always find their way home." Amelia smiled a little more, her shoulders relaxing. "Do you think she'll be mad at me for getting lost?" "No, not at all," Walter said quickly. "Your mom will be happy just to see you, and she'll be proud of how brave you've been." Amelia's small smile grew a little bigger, and for the first time since Walter had found her, she seemed truly comforted. Just then, the mall security officer approached them. "We've made the announcement," he said with a nod. "We should give it a few more minutes." Walter nodded and stood up. "Thanks," he said to the officer before turning back to Amelia. "I'm sure they'll find you soon. How about we take a little walk while we wait?" Amelia's eyes lit up. "Okay," she said, standing up with a little more energy. As they walked around the mall, Walter noticed more and more how brave Amelia was. She was a little nervous, of course, but she held her head high, and her grip on Mr. Fluff was starting to relax. Walter felt proud of her, as though he had known her for years. "Do you think I'll ever see you again?" Amelia suddenly asked, her voice soft. Walter stopped walking for a moment and looked down at her. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But if I don't, I'll always remember how brave you were today." Amelia smiled at him, her eyes twinkling. "Thank you, Mr. Walter. You're really nice." Walter smiled back. "You're welcome, Amelia. You're a special little girl." They continued walking together, and Walter couldn't help but feel that fate had brought him to this moment. He didn't know why, but something told him this encounter was more than just a simple act of kindness. Something was connecting them in a way he couldn't explain. Walter and Amelia walked through the busy mall, their footsteps echoing as they passed store after store. The mall seemed even bigger than usual today, with so many people moving around in every direction. But despite the crowd, Walter's focus remained on finding Amelia's parents. They walked to the mall's security office, where a friendly officer had already taken down Amelia's description. The officer assured Walter that they'd make an announcement over the mall's intercom to help find her parents. Walter tried to stay positive, but a small feeling of worry tugged at him. Amelia had been so calm, but he knew she must be worried deep down. "Let's go for a walk while we wait," Walter suggested to Amelia. "Maybe we'll spot your parents along the way." Amelia nodded quietly, holding tightly to her teddy bear, Mr. Fluff. "Okay," she said, her voice small. They walked together through the mall, passing brightly colored stores with windows full of toys, clothes, and food. Walter noticed that Amelia's eyes flickered nervously as they passed some of the busy shops. People were talking, laughing, and shopping, but no one seemed to be paying attention to the little girl who had just been lost. After a few minutes, Walter stopped and looked around. He didn't see anyone looking for a lost child, but he noticed that Amelia's hand was shaking slightly, her grip on Mr. Fluff tightening. Walter's heart went out to her. "Amelia," he said softly, "are you okay?" She nodded but didn't say anything for a moment. Finally, she spoke up. "What if they can't find me?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Walter gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll find them," he said with a smile. "Sometimes it takes a little while, but we just need to keep looking." Amelia's eyes searched Walter's face, looking for reassurance. Walter gave her his best smile, trying to ease her fears. "I've been lost before, too, you know," he said. "When I was your age, I got separated from my parents at a park once. I was scared, but then I saw them. It didn't take long. And I bet your mom and dad are looking for you right now, just like I was." Amelia smiled a little at that. You really think they're looking for me? I know they are, Walter said. Parents always look for their kids. They never stop. They continued walking, but Walter's mind kept racing. How long would it take for Amelia's parents to find her? Would they be able to get to the mall soon? He wished he could do more to speed things up. They passed by the food court, where families were sitting at tables, chatting, and enjoying their meals. Walter looked over at Amelia, who seemed lost in thought. She wasn't as nervous now, but Walter knew it was because she was trying not to show it. Just then, the mall's intercom crackled to life. "Attention shoppers," the voice announced. "We have a young girl named Amelia who is looking for her parents. If you are her family, please report to the security office." Walter's heart skipped a beat. He looked down at Amelia, who had stopped in her tracks. Her eyes were wide with hope. "Do you think they heard it?" she asked quietly. "I'm sure they did," Walter said, his voice full of excitement. "Let's go check." Together, they hurried back to the security office, where the officer was waiting for them. "I just got a call," the officer said. "A couple came to the front desk, and they say they're looking for a little girl named Amelia." Walter smiled at Amelia, who looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "See," Walter said, "I told you they were looking for you." As Walter and Amelia approached the security office, a mixture of excitement and nervousness filled the air. Amelia squeezed Mr. Fluff tighter, her eyes bright with hope. She had been so brave up until now, but Walter could see that a part of her was still uncertain, still waiting for the moment when she would be back with her parents. The security officer smiled at them as they entered, his expression warm and welcoming. "I believe we found your parents, Amelia," he said, pointing to a couple standing nearby. The woman had tear-streaked cheeks, and the man looked like he hadn't stopped looking around in search of his daughter. The moment Amelia's eyes locked onto them, her face lit up. "Mom! Dad!" she cried, running toward them. Her parents rushed to meet her, wrapping her in a tight hug. Walter stood quietly by the door, watching the reunion unfold. It was a beautiful moment, one filled with relief, love, and a deep sense of connection. Amelia's mom, Linda, looked down at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Amelia, sweetheart, we've been looking for you everywhere," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was with Mr. Walter," Amelia explained, pointing back at him. "He helped me find you." Walter smiled warmly, but a strange feeling tugged at his chest as he watched the family. There was something about Linda's face that seemed oddly familiar, as if he had seen her before. The feeling grew stronger, but Walter pushed it aside. After all, he had only just met her, and the day had been filled with so much chaos. Linda looked over at Walter, noticing his lingering gaze. "Thank you so much for helping Amelia," she said, walking toward him. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Walter nodded, his voice a bit hushed. "It was my pleasure. She's a brave little girl." Linda smiled, though there was a hint of something else in her eyes, a softness that felt almost nostalgic. "You know," she said, still looking at Walter, "you remind me so much of someone I used to know. I can't quite put my finger on it." Walter's heart skipped a beat. He had been feeling the same thing ever since he first saw her. There was something about Linda's face, something that made him feel like they shared a connection, something deeper than just a chance encounter. Before he could say anything more, Mitch, Amelia's father, spoke up. "Linda, honey, let's not keep Walter standing here. He's done so much for us today. We owe him." Walter didn't know what to say. He was used to helping people. After all, that was part of his job as a janitor. But there was something different about this situation. Something told him he was meant to be here, at this moment, helping Amelia. "Maybe we can repay you somehow," Mitch suggested, his voice full of gratitude. "We're not sure what we can do, but we would love to thank you properly." Walter smiled politely, feeling humbled by their words. "No need for anything, really. I was just doing what any kind person would do." Linda nodded, her eyes still studying him as if trying to figure out something. "I just feel like there's something I'm missing here, something familiar about you." Walter paused for a moment, his mind racing. Could this be a coincidence? Could she somehow be related to his own past? He tried to push away the thoughts, but they lingered. "Well," he said, shifting on his feet, "I'm just happy I could help." Mitch smiled at Walter, then turned to his wife. "Well, we should head home and make sure Amelia gets something to eat. She's probably starving after all that excitement." Amelia nodded eagerly. "Can we go get pancakes, Mom?" Linda laughed softly. "Of course, sweetheart. Pancakes all around." As the family began to leave the security office, Walter felt a sense of peace. Amelia was safe, but as he turned to go back to his work, the feeling of familiarity with Linda lingered in his mind, and something deep inside told him that this wasn't the end of their story. The next few days passed quietly for Walter. He returned to his routine as a janitor at the mall, sweeping floors and keeping the place clean. Yet, every now and then, his mind wandered back to the brief but strange encounter with Amelia and her parents. There was something about them, something about Linda, that he couldn't shake. It felt like a connection he couldn't explain. One evening, after finishing his shift, Walter decided to take a walk through the mall to clear his mind. The crowds had thinned, and the stores were beginning to close for the night. As he passed the food court, he spotted Linda and Mitch sitting at a table, eating dinner with Amelia. They waved at him, and Walter felt a wave of warmth wash over him. "Hey, Walter," Linda called, smiling. "Join us for a moment. We saved a seat for you." Walter hesitated but then decided to sit with them. He had helped them once, and now they seemed like old friends, even though he barely knew them. He took a seat at their table, and Amelia immediately smiled and waved. "Hi, Mr. Walter," she said happily. "I told Mom and Dad how you helped me." Walter chuckled and gave her a gentle nod. "I'm just glad I could help, Amelia." As they ate, the conversation turned to more casual topics: Amelia's favorite toys, Mitch's work, and Linda's love of cooking. But through it all, Walter couldn't stop thinking about the strange feeling he had when he first met Linda. There was something in her eyes, something that made him feel as though they had crossed paths before. As they finished their meal, Walter finally spoke up. "Linda, if you don't mind me asking, where did you grow up?" Linda looked at him with a curious expression. "I grew up here in the city, but I lived with my grandmother for a while. She had a house in the countryside." "Why do you ask?" Walter's heart skipped a beat. The way Linda spoke, the mention of her grandmother, it made something click inside his mind. He tried to remain calm, but his curiosity was growing stronger. "Your grandmother," he began. "Did she have a brother? Maybe someone who looked a bit like me?" Linda looked at him with surprise, and for a moment, there was silence. Then she nodded slowly. "Actually, she did. Her brother. He lived far away when I was little. I don't remember much about him, but I remember my mom always talking about him. She said he had a kind face, just like you." She paused, studying Walter more closely. "It's funny you mention that. I think my mom always wondered what happened to him. She told me stories about him when I was younger. She always wished she could find him again." Walter felt his heart race. Could it be? Could this woman, who seemed so familiar, really be connected to his long-lost family? He had grown up in a small town, far from where Linda's grandmother had lived. His family had been scattered after his parents died, and he had lost touch with his sister, Evelyn, years ago. "Do you have any old pictures of your mom and her brother?" Walter asked carefully. Linda looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "I think I might. I'll have to dig through some old boxes, but I'm pretty sure there's something." Walter's mind raced. Could Evelyn be Linda's mother? He hadn't heard her name in years, but it sounded so familiar. He couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. "Well," Walter said, trying to steady his voice, "if you do find anything, I'd like to see it." Linda agreed to look through her family's old photos, and as she promised, she would let him know if she found anything. Walter left the mall that night with more questions than answers, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense that his life and his past might be closer than he ever imagined. The next few days felt like an eternity for Walter. His thoughts kept circling back to the conversation he had with Linda. The feeling of familiarity lingered, and he couldn't shake the idea that somehow, someway, his long-lost sister, Evelyn, might be tied to Linda's family. Walter's curiosity and unease grew with each passing hour. Then one evening, as he was finishing his shift at the mall, he received a call. It was Linda. Her voice was warm, but there was an edge of excitement in her tone. "Walter, I found something. I've been going through some old boxes of family photos, and I think you're going to want to see this." Walter's heart skipped a beat. He felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "I'm on my way," he replied quickly. When he arrived at Linda's house that evening, it felt like stepping into a different world. The house was cozy, with warm lights glowing from the windows. Inside, Linda greeted him with a smile, holding a few old photo albums in her hands. "Come in," she said, leading him into the living room. "I found some pictures I think you'll want to see. They're from my mom's old photo albums." Walter sat down on the couch, his heart pounding in his chest. Amelia was already curled up on a chair, coloring quietly, but she looked up and smiled at Walter as he entered. "Hi, Mr. Walter," she said brightly. "Hey, Amelia," Walter replied with a smile, but his focus remained on the photo albums in Linda's hands. Linda opened the first album and began flipping through the pages. "These are some of my mom's old family pictures," she explained, her voice soft. "She always spoke about her brother, your relative, I think." Walter nodded, his eyes fixed on the photos. As Linda turned the pages, Walter's breath caught when he saw an old picture of a young woman, standing with a man he could barely recognize. But something about his face was unmistakable. It was him. It was his father, back when he was young. Walter felt a wave of emotion flood through him. He looked at Linda, his voice shaky. "Is that your mom? And is that her brother?" Linda nodded, her expression serious. "That's my mom, and this is her brother, the one she always talked about. She told me he went off to work somewhere far away, but I never knew what happened to him after that. She kept his picture with hers, hoping one day he'd come back." Walter could barely speak. He leaned in closer to the photo, his eyes tracing the familiar face of his father. But the man standing next to her wasn't just anyone. It was his father's brother, his uncle, who he had lost touch with so long ago. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. "Your mom," Walter said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She's Evelyn, isn't she?" Linda's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly nodded. "Yes, Evelyn. That was her name." Walter sat back, stunned. His heart raced as he processed what he was hearing. This was not a coincidence. Evelyn had been his sister, the one he lost contact with all those years ago after their family had fallen apart. And now her daughter, Linda, was standing right in front of him. "This is incredible," Walter murmured. I don't know what to say. I never imagined I would find family like this." Linda smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "I don't know what to say either, Walter. But I think it's meant to be. My mom always wanted to find you, to find her brother again. She never gave up hope, even though it had been so many years." For the first time in a long while, Walter felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone anymore. The family he had lost so many years ago was still out there. And now, thanks to a lost little girl and a simple act of kindness, he had found them. Amelia looked up at Walter, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Does this mean you're part of our family now?" Walter smiled at her, his heart full. "I think it does, Amelia." The days that followed Walter's discovery felt like a dream. He had always believed that family was lost to time, that the people who had meant the most to him were gone forever. But now, standing in Linda's living room, Looking at old photographs of his sister and her family, it felt as though a missing piece of his life had finally been found. Walter spent more time with Linda and her family over the next few weeks. He visited them regularly, helping Amelia with her homework, or just sitting with Linda and Mitch, talking about the old days. They laughed together, sharing stories about Evelyn, Walter's sister, and the memories that Linda's mother, Evelyn, had kept alive. There were stories of family reunions, celebrations, and the small moments that made their bond so strong. Amelia was thrilled to have Walter around. She proudly called him Uncle Walter and loved to show him her drawings. Walter found himself getting closer to her, enjoying the simple joys of being part of their family. The feeling of connection that had been missing for so long began to grow, and it felt as though he had never been apart from them. One afternoon, Walter and Linda sat together in the kitchen, sipping tea. Amelia was in the other room, playing with her toys, and Mitch had gone out to run some errands. Linda seemed a bit quieter than usual as she looked through the old family albums again. "You know," Linda said, her voice soft, "I never imagined I would find you like this, Walter. I've always wondered what happened to my mom's brother, but I never thought it would be this way. It feels like fate brought us together." Walter nodded, his heart full of emotions. "I don't know how this happened, but I'm glad it did. After all these years, I thought I was alone. I never thought I'd see Evelyn's family again." There was a brief silence as Linda flipped through another photo album, pausing at a picture of her mom holding a baby. She smiled as she looked at the image. "This is a picture of me when I was little," she said. "I don't remember much about my mom's brother, but I know he cared a lot about her." Walter looked closely at the photo, then back at Linda. "It's strange," he said slowly, "how life can separate people for so long. But somehow, we found our way back to each other." Linda smiled, her eyes twinkling. "It's not just fate, Walter. It's all the little things that brought us here. You helped my daughter when she was lost. That act of kindness brought us to you, and now we're here." Walter felt a lump in his throat. He had always believed in the power of kindness, but seeing how his simple gesture had brought them together made him realize how much it mattered. He hadn't just helped Amelia that day. He had helped his family find each other again. Later that evening, as Walter sat with Amelia and Linda in the living room, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had come into their lives as a stranger, but now he was an integral part of their family. They weren't just connected by blood anymore. They were connected by love, by the shared memories of Evelyn, and by the bond that had been rebuilt. Amelia climbed onto Walter's lap, giggling as she showed him a new drawing. "Look, Uncle Walter, it's a picture of our family," she said, proudly holding up her artwork. Walter smiled, feeling a deep warmth in his heart. "It's perfect," he said, looking around at the people who had become his family again. "It really is." As the evening passed, Walter realized that his journey to find his family had only just begun. There were still many stories to share, many memories to create, and many more moments of joy to experience together. And for the first time in a long while, Walter knew that he wasn't alone anymore. It had been several weeks since Walter had reunited with Linda and her family. As each day passed, he felt more and more like a real part of their lives. Amelia continued to call him Uncle Walter, and every time he heard it, his heart swelled with warmth. The simple act of kindness that had started their journey had blossomed into something much deeper, a connection that he had thought was lost forever. Walter had always been content with his quiet life as a janitor, keeping to himself, helping people when he could. But now, being surrounded by Linda, Mitch, and Amelia, he realized that his life had been missing something, a family. They had given him the gift of belonging, and he couldn't be more grateful. One afternoon, Walter sat on the porch of Linda's house, watching the sun slowly dip behind the horizon. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Linda came out to join him, holding 2 cups of tea in her hands. She handed one to Walter and sat down beside him, her face soft with contentment. "It's a beautiful evening," Linda said, taking a sip of her tea. "I'm so glad you're part of our family now, Walter. It feels like everything's fallen into place." Walter smiled and nodded, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. "I never imagined I'd find my family like this. After all these years, I thought I'd be alone. But now, I feel like I've found something I've been missing." Linda looked at him with a knowing expression. "It's funny how life works out sometimes. I've always believed that people come into your life for a reason. And you were meant to be part of ours." Walter's heart swelled with gratitude. He looked at Linda, then at Amelia, who was playing with her toys in the yard. Mitch was inside, making dinner, and the house was filled with the comforting sounds of everyday life. For the first time in a long while, Walter felt truly at peace. "I never thought it would happen this way," Walter said softly. "I was just doing what I thought was right, helping a little girl. But now, I feel like I've been given a second chance, a chance to be part of something I thought was gone." Linda smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "Sometimes, the smallest acts lead to the biggest changes." As they sat together in the fading light, Walter reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. He had come into this family as a stranger, but now he was part of their everyday world. He was a witness to Amelia's laughter, a shoulder for Linda to lean on, and a friend to Mitch. He had gone from feeling lost to being found, not just by his family, but by himself. That night, as Walter said his goodbyes and headed home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just someone who cleaned up after others. He was a part of something bigger, a family that had opened their hearts to him and accepted him without hesitation. The stars sparkled brightly in the sky as Walter walked down the path toward his apartment. He felt like he had a purpose now, something worth waking up for every day. He wasn't alone. He never would be again. As he reached his door and turned to look back at Linda's house in the distance, Walter smiled. He had helped a little girl find her way home. And in doing so, he had found his own place in the world. The days that followed Walter's reunion with Linda and her family were filled with a new sense of purpose. He had become a part of their world in a way he never expected. Amelia's drawings were filled with pictures of their family. Walter, always included with a big smile, standing beside her mom and dad. She often asked Walter to help her with her homework, and they spent hours together talking about everything from school to the things they liked to do. It felt so natural, so right. One Sunday afternoon, after a quiet breakfast together, Linda invited Walter to join them for a walk in the park. It had become a regular thing now, a time for the family to bond, away from the business of life. Mitch, who always had a few good jokes to share, and Amelia, who loved to chase after the ducks in the pond, were the heart of the group. Walter enjoyed watching them, laughing, playing, and just being together. As they strolled along the walking path, Walter couldn't help but smile at the scene around him. The sun was shining brightly, the birds were singing, and there was a soft breeze in the air. He was living in a way he hadn't thought possible a few months ago. It was as if the world had opened up, and he was finally part of something that mattered. At one point during their walk, Amelia stopped by a small flower garden and pointed to a bright red tulip. "Look, Uncle Walter, it's just like the one you gave me the first time we met." Walter stopped and looked at her, his heart warmed by the memory. "That's right, Amelia. I remember." Linda smiled as she joined them. "You know, Walter," she said, her voice gentle, "I've been thinking a lot about how things came together. You helped Amelia that day when she was lost, and now you're part of our family. It feels like something we didn't expect, but something we all needed." Walter's heart swelled with emotion. "I never thought I'd find my family again," he said quietly. "I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. But now I feel like I've been given a chance to start over." Mitch, who had been walking ahead with a relaxed smile, turned around and grinned. "You know, Walter, I'm glad you came into our lives. Amelia talks about you all the time. It's good to have another man around the house." keeps things interesting. They all laughed, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. There was no rush, no worry, just a peaceful moment of connection between them all. Walter had found his place, and it was here, with them, in a family he had thought was lost forever. As they continued their walk, Walter noticed how much had changed within him. Before, he had been content with his life in the background, helping when needed, but never really part of something. Now he knew he was valued, loved, and needed. Every laugh, every shared moment, filled him with a sense of belonging. That evening, as Walter left Linda's house after dinner, he paused at the door, looking back at the family gathered around the table. Amelia waved at him from the window, her face filled with joy. Walter's heart felt light. He had no idea where this new chapter of his life would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. He had found a place where he truly belonged. As he walked down the quiet street, Walter looked up at the stars. The night was calm, the air cool and crisp. He smiled to himself, grateful for the journey that had brought him here. Helping a lost little girl had changed everything. His past, his present, and now, his future. And with that thought, Walter stepped forward into his new life, ready to embrace whatever came next.